Sri Aurobindo is describing the means by which the physical consciousness and the body can be perfected. This discussion must be seen in the larger context of the earlier study, which described the larger psychological perfection and transformation of the mental and vital consciousness. And then the physical now is the focus. In the relationship between these different levels, when the mother was asked this question, whether the physical consciousness can be awakened and transformed first, she responded by saying that normally the transformation is top down. It starts from our own higher parts and then descends and settles into the lower until eventually it transforms the physical. And she gives a few examples. She says, unless you are able to change the stubbornness and smallness of your mental consciousness, what is there in you which will help the physical consciousness to change and free itself? And then, almost as if in joke, she says, if you think you can transform from below up, just try. It will be an interesting thing. She also makes this observation that when that transformation proceeds from below up, it is possible to describe it as the body awakening and rising to a higher consciousness. But actually, it is the higher which settles and liberates it. So this is the earlier context of all our earlier discussions, which we must keep in mind even as we proceed with what we are now studying. When it comes to action and transformation of the physical consciousness, Sri Aurobindo says the first condition for the natural perfection of the body is health and strength. And it seems something quite obvious, but Sri Aurobindo's description of health and strength is not merely the physical, muscular, bone and nerve structure, but he goes beyond into the subtler part of the physical, which he calls the subtle physical. And then from there, the life force which fills the whole gross physical and subtle physical. And then from there also, the parts of the mental consciousness which are embedded in the physical consciousness. All of these must be made healthy and strong, and we have seen means by which this kind of a training can be achieved. After that, he says, there are two conditions for the perfection of the body. The first is awakening of the physical consciousness, and second is an education and evocation and training of the body's potential. And these are the things which we are now discussing. In terms of this awakening of the physical consciousness, here also, Sri Aurobindo does not mean by that merely the consciousness of one part and function of the physical, but he includes in this all the different gradations involved in the most gross physical, subtle physical, life force in the physical, and the part of the mental will which is connected to the physical. With all this, he says, we begin where we are and take up the whole consciousness as we can. Here he gives 3 levels or layers of effort. He says, what is awake, we have to make fully conscious. What is asleep, we have to arouse and set to work. What is latent, we have to evoke and educate. And this is in fact the sequence in which we go, because what is latent, not even asleep, but actually latent, and to be brought out, cannot be accessed in the way the physical consciousness is set. Because the lower you go, the duller, darker, and more unconscious it becomes. So we begin by the part of the physical consciousness which is most awake. And that most awake is still actually a half asleep condition, and that has to be brought into full wakefulness. And as that grows, it's as if the boundary of consciousness spreads deeper and down, and then we find there are things which are asleep, and those we have to arouse and set to work. And then deeper down, there is a potential which we must train and educate. And here, the scope of that potential is something we will look at later. But in principle, this potential includes things which are far beyond the imagination of our most wild dreams or science fiction fantasies. In the science fiction fantasies, you will see possibilities described in certain cartoons initially, and now in movie form, of examples which are popularly described as X-Men, Superman, Batman, and things like that, or Spider-Man, where you see a capacity of the body which is going beyond the normal range. And in X-Men, this is taken to some extraordinary degrees, as well as the possibilities of the mind. All of these are in fact a potential that exists within the human consciousness. And because it exists, we are led to dream of these possibilities. And yet, their emergence does not take place by mere genetic manipulation or some accident of a lightning strike or some radiation of some device. It emerges when the consciousness of the being awakens to its own deeper possibilities. And then those possibilities can begin to come forth, and they reorganize the whole material of our being from within out, from above down. And as this material is reorganized, it is made capable to express that potential. It is not by an external provocation and shock that the things within are brought forward, but the things within emerging can destabilize the external conditions as they rearrange to reorganize them. Now, when we come to this actual process of making conscious and pushing the boundary of our awareness deeper, here he says we are faced with 2 aspects of the body consciousness. The first aspect is an automatism which is at work in the physical plane without intervention of mind, and as long as mind does not intervene, it seems to go on by itself. When mind intervenes, it spoils it. And we saw examples of those functionings in our own human biological system. But such also exists, because Sri Aurobindo uses the word here physical plane, not just the physical body consciousness. Such also exists in material processes in nature. It is that automatism at its roots that we describe as laws of physics or chemistry or even to some extent the biology. In fact, they are not laws, they are habitual tendencies of the physical consciousness. They're deeply embedded at a level of automatism which seems spontaneous, precise, and accurate in its working. And because we see that happening pretty much everywhere, we describe them as laws. But in fact, if the mind intervenes, it can change those habits. Not only in our own physical body, but even in material external to the body. The problem is, when the intervention of the mind withdraws, the physical consciousness lapses back to its old habit. And so we say it was a law and there was a temporary disturbance by the mind's intervention, but the law remains. But actually, it's not a law, it's just a habit. This external intervention we see in a whole variety of phenomena which are generally described as paranormal or psychic. And in this, there's a whole spread which includes psychokinesis, moving objects by thought power. But these are very narrow words. The actual scope of the thought intervention is much wider. There are descriptions, for example, of some popular psychics, as they are called, such as Uri Geller, who, on entering the subterranean vaults of the particle accelerators, were caused all the instruments around them to malfunction. And they were able to influence from a distance the actual outcome of the particle accelerator experiments by imprint of thought alone. Now, this is a direct action of mind on material processes at a level of their normal automatism, which we call law. But if such a thing were to be persisted, and if the imprint of that will extended widely enough and remained, then we would have changed the law and the new rhythm would be in effect in nature. In fact, when we look back at a sufficiently large span of time, we find that those so-called laws have been changing over time, over a few billion years perhaps. But things have emerged which earlier were impossible, and as those possibilities came up abnormally at first, and then more and more frequently, it was as if the habit in the physical consciousness accepted them, and then they became more frequent and then suddenly stabilized as a normal condition, and you have a new material, a new substance, a new element, a new process, a new interaction, which is now common as law. In this scheme, you will see the developments of various gradations of elements, each more complex and at first unstable and then stabilizing, representing such a scheme of evolution in matter with the gradual changing and readjustment of its laws. And it is interesting to see that many of the elements of the higher range are unstable even today, and to some extent that represents the inability of the physical consciousness to organize itself to hold those more massive elements together, such as uranium and others. But all of this is constantly pushed or held by an imprint of a universal or a cosmic mind which formed it. In the individual consciousness, it is an individual focus of mind intervening on an otherwise settled order, trying to change it. But precisely as this individual change begins to imprint itself, the physical body, which is the focus and container of this individual consciousness, itself undergoes new habits. Now, at this point, when we use the word habit in relation to the body, we will still distinguish various levels of the body's habits. At its lowest, there is the automatism, which is almost of the gross physical inconscience, so-called laws of physics, which are operating in our physical body also, except that in this physical body, certain laws are as if bypassed, modified, or even exceeded, such as the law of conservation of energy or the law of entropy. In this body, as in all living things, it's as if entropy is negated. That is, the tendency for things to fall back into disorder is overcome, at least for the duration of the lifetime. And you see increasing order growing, extending, expanding. And as that subversion of the law of matter is taken up by life and brought up into the domain of the mind takes up this and is able to organize the physical body itself, train it by exercise to make it even more harmonious, strong, better structured, ordered, and is able to organize in life expression a greater beauty and harmony and order. And all of these are completely in contradiction to the most fundamental inconscient law of increasing disorder and death. And yet it happens. Similarly, the law of similarly, other tendencies also, as they are taken up by life and mind, are gradually changed and even neutralized and subverted. Among them, the capacity to draw or express more energy than which you take in. So a human being may take a certain quantum of energy or nutrition, but is able to express far more. And even it is possible, and we know of enough cases today, of people who seem not to eat at all and yet are able to function normally and express extraordinary amounts of energy. In fact, it is a common experience that when we are fasting, after an initial discomfort, suddenly a huge amount of energy kicks in and we are able to express so much more. Obviously, here we are bypassing those laws of inconscience by introduction of a higher principle and law. So we see here already in the physical body, layer by layer, something is being changed. New possibilities are being expressed. And yet, did they belong outside or were they already latent and brought out? So this first layer we are seeing is of an automatism. And that automatism from the most material inconscient level goes up through the biological organization of cells and then clusters of cells, specializations of cells like nerves, tissue, bone, muscle, skin, and then beyond that, larger organic movements. And in all of them, there is this automatism that has been as if organized and developed over millions of years through the species, through the evolution across species, until a newborn baby who has never been taught knows exactly to put food in its mouth when it is hungry and feels pain in the stomach. That's an automatism which is completely bypassing the mind. And when the food goes in, it knows to swallow, it knows to digest, it knows to excrete, and it knows exactly what to absorb, which is healthy, how much to absorb according to the overall body's need, and so on. And this whole intelligence is held in an automatism of the entire functioning, organic functioning of the human form. A normal human being passes through the whole journey of life, hardly ever becoming conscious of this entire domain of automatism. Our body lives by itself. Our mind inhabiting the body is busy doing what it is enjoying, and our life energy is pushing for their fulfillment of desires. The body dumbly is dragged and follows, constantly adapting itself as far as it can go, adjusting to the demands of the mind and the vital, and is dragged on by these two until eventually it collapses or gives up or just stands back in a strike and a revolt or reaction, and then the mind and vitals say, oh, my body fell ill. And again we go to the doctor who fills it with more automatism. That's what the medicine does. The medicine triggers processes of automatism to try to push and pull things and bring them back into some kind of harmony. But if for a moment we paused and turned our mind's awareness upon this physical automatism, tried to become aware of its needs and tendencies, we will find it can actually express itself. It can even put forward a preference, a choice, a wish, a request, or a demand. And if the mind cooperates, it can also give back its own support and cooperation. But more important, if the mind enters this domain of automatism, it can become conscious of what was earlier subconscious or even unconscious, and then consciously mold and shape and change even those processes, or modify and set right any imbalances, and so on. So this whole domain of automatism is one aspect, and there is a second aspect, he says, aspect of movements and tendencies which the mind can teach, it can train, and then let go, and the body consciousness follows automatically, faultlessly, even when the mind, the will and thoughts do not directly work upon them. In fact, this layer, this aspect, is in large part what we call training, culturing, and so on, of the physical consciousness. This extends from setting a rhythm for food in the body from childhood, to setting a fixed time for sleeping, and as we grow older, to disciplining the body from becoming restless, training it to act when we choose to, refining the larger muscular and nervous movements and capacities. And then when we take it to specialized training, as in gymnastics, athletics or games, or playing musical instruments, then we are making the body do things which it has never done in its evolutionary journey of the species. And at that point, you're introducing a new habit, a new rhythm, and the body learns quickly. When the mind disconnects, the body continues automatically. And in fact, there is a necessity for the body to continue automatically to free the mind for other tasks. For example, all of us as adults eat food without thinking about it. We are busy talking or we are watching television while we eat. Our spoon never misses the mouth. That's actually an automatism which has been trained. The baby cannot seem to do that on his own, but once it is trained, then the body follows. Or sometimes it goes wrong when while eating you try to speak and there is a slight loss of timing of the swallowing movement and the food goes into the wrong pipe and you cough. But then that's the other safety automatism of the body, the coughing instinct which kicks in to protect itself. So you find all these layers of automatism working, and really when you look back at the physical life of a normal human being, we are not at all conscious and we do not live consciously at all. Almost 99% of our day and our life is lived by this automatism. Seen from that perspective, we are no different from the imprint with our genetic heredity and species heredity and animal instincts have imprinted on us. We just allow those to carry, and that's all there is to it. But when we are conscious, and especially when we take to a spiritual potential, then all of these things can be put in alignment to the higher spiritual purpose. Still, unfortunately, in the large part of the spirituality so far, in most spiritual traditions, the body was beaten down because it was a problem and a burden for the flight of the higher parts of our being. It is only in the integral yoga that we are asked to take up the physical consciousness into the higher movement. And that's why all this discussion of the body consciousness. So this perfection of this skill of both these, of this, especially the secondary aspect of the trained automatism, is what Sri Aurobindo refers to. And this can be taken very far, he says. A complete fitness for any demand that the mind and life energy can make on the body. To that extent, we can take it. But then, if we go beyond the lower means, all this can be achieved by a normal physical training program. If we go beyond that, if we bring into it the mind and life energy, or beyond that even the energy of the spirit, then so much more can be achieved. So here we are meeting a certain limitation of the physical consciousness, which is what we discussed last time, the last thing. He says that whatever we achieve in the physical field by physical means is necessarily insecure and bound by limits. Even what seems a perfect health and strength is precarious and can be easily dislodged from its balance. For this to be stabilized, we must go beyond the limits, and we must as we grow beyond these limits, then the security also grows. So how do we go beyond the limits? And here comes the discussion which we are now taking up. One direction, there are other things also one can do, but one direction in which our consciousness must grow is an increasing hold from within or from above on the body and its powers. And its more conscious response to the higher parts of our being. The mind preeminently is man. And here we saw, this also we had covered last time, the mind as the conscious, self-aware inhabitant in the body is the point of awareness which can begin to influence the physical consciousness from above downwards. And if the mind can take up and control the instincts and automatisms of the life energy and the subtle physical consciousness and the body, if it can enter into them, consciously use, and as we say, fully mentalize their instinctive or spontaneous action, the perfection of these energies, their action too becomes more conscious and more aware of itself and more perfect. So this we had discussed briefly, but a further elaboration is needed here. When the mind thus turns, and we try to become conscious of the processes, tendencies, and even instinctive automatic movements within us, we realize that there is a range we can become aware of, there is a range we are not aware of. What we are aware of, we can control. What we are not aware of, we cannot control. It's as simple as that. If we push the boundary of awareness, yes, we will gain the control. For example, therefore, we can control our breathing at will. Stop, pause, breathe slow, breathe fast, breathe deep, breathe shallow, breathe from the upper half or lower half. All that stuff, easy to do because we're conscious of the breathing and the substance and parts of our body which are involved in the breathing. But try to become conscious of the heart, and you can't. You just cannot feel it. At best, when the heart is pounding, you can feel the thumping against the rest of the chest. But you can't feel the heart itself which is thumping. Sometimes, when there is an excessive strain, it feels like there is a pain. But the pain also, if you try to isolate the location, it is felt in the chest, but you are not feeling the heart itself. As they say, in a heart attack, you do not know the heart is in trouble. You know it only by symptoms reflected in the chest or in the arm, shoulders, and so on. Because we are simply not conscious of that whole space. And yet, it is conscious in a different way. We would call it subconscious or subliminal. It is conscious. It knows what it must do, when to do, and so on. So there is a barrier as if to our mind's awareness. What is this interface? And here he gives us a clue when he says, the mind must take up and control the instincts and automatisms of the life energy and the subtle physical consciousness and the body. This sequence is the key. So I'll give a few examples first. We are not conscious of the heartbeat, but we are conscious of the energy with which we are infused. I'm full of this enthusiasm, excitement, tension, whatever it is, before my physical exercise or competitions or games. I'm aware of the life energies. And if I say, relax yourself, don't be so tense, yes, you can do that. You can change that. If I say, concentrate your energies, don't get restless and dispersed, yes, you can settle your energies, pull them back as if. Or if I suddenly inform you that, oh, your particular match tournament is cancelled or postponed to tomorrow, you'll let go and your life energies just drop. On the other hand, when suddenly you're told, this is it, now you have to rush, or there's an emergency, somebody calls for help, the energies rush forward, or you draw them out. The mind has access to the life force. And the life force itself can operate in a general way on the whole body. You can draw up the whole body, or you can, by concentrating your awareness, isolate a part of the flow of life energy. So you can, for example, become conscious of the life energy in the arms or in the hands or in the legs or stomach, chest, in a broad sense. If you find you're tired, you can feel where in your body the tiredness exists. And consciously relax that part, open that, and do something at the level of life energies. I'll just give an example. This is not an uncommon experience. When you are climbing a large number of steps, there is a point at first where you have the energy, but as you proceed, there's a kind of a tiredness which settles in. Then there is a second breath which comes and you feel a new level of energy rushing in. But after a point, the muscles of the legs as if lock up. You can't move your legs although you have energy in the body. At that point, if you consciously feel and relax that part, and your mind feeling the legs relaxing, takes the steps in a movement of relaxation rather than tension. Your mind is operating at the energetic knot in that part and relaxes, loosens it, and the energy begins to flow in that part, in the physical substance of the muscles. And then within a few minutes, it releases the knot and you find your muscles are no more locked up and you can continue. And even you find, oh, now I can almost run as I climb up. Now, these are experiences which anybody who's worked on the body a little bit can confirm, and sometimes these things just happen spontaneously. But what you're doing in all these cases is turning the mind's awareness and will onto the flow of energy in a specific part. Similarly, if you're working on playing an instrument, I'm taking a different extreme of example, where the rest of your body is quiescent, but your fingers only, or your breath and fingers have to move. And there's a point where you somehow can't get it. If you become conscious of the fingers, relax the fingers or bring a stillness into them, and that's actually working on the energies at that point. The energy becoming quiet, you find now suddenly the skill which you were not able to get happens. Because earlier the energy was in agitation, and so the coordination between the fingers was not happening because of the agitated impulsiveness of energy following its own imprint of habit. You relaxed it, you quieted the energy, and allowed something else to shape a new rhythm in the energies, and then the body followed. So in all these you see the key first, the mind turning to awareness of life force, and we have two layers of life force: the free flowing life force in the body, and then the life force embedded in the physical body. Through the first, you enter into the second, and from there, you can reshape and new set rhythms and habits. Then, from there, the subtle physical consciousness, and then the gross body. Now, the subtle physical consciousness from the life energy can be felt relatively easily. Even otherwise, the mind can become aware of it relatively easily if we become very quiet, if we relax the whole sensational awareness of the body. And those who are used to meditation, a slight interiorization of the consciousness immediately makes it palpable, and it is often felt as a dense layer extending beyond the physical outlines of the body. Often in meditation, you feel as if your body is swollen up, or you feel light and floating, and these are all sensations of the subtle body or the subtle physical. To get to that is relatively easy. Sometimes one can also train this through exercises such as Tai Chi, or exercises such as asanas, where there is a relaxation and yet a movement. But once we are aware of that, you notice, similar to life force, you can turn your mind's awareness to a part of the subtle physical. It feels in sensation similar to the sensation of the gross physical, except that if you close your eyes and feel carefully, you will feel it extends a little beyond the outline of the gross physical. But because there is a sensation similar, we tend to think we're feeling the gross body. Actually, we're more aware of the subtle at that point. The distinction needs to be made to our own awareness as a training. And being in that awareness, one can similarly imprint an intention, a habit, or even set right an imbalance, detect an imbalance, and then set it right. I'll just give a few examples here. If you feel that having eaten some food, your stomach is now bordering on some kind of imbalance, it is finding it hard to digest, it's feeling uncomfortable, it might just let go and throw it out in a loose motion, and you feel when that's happening. That sensation itself is coming by either some mix of life energy feeling queasy, or the life energy reversed in its flow and pushing up and causing a physical ripple upwards, pressing on the throat and the esophagus and things like that. All of these sensations are pushed by life force. You can feel the life force turning up. Then you bring your awareness there, quiet that life force, turn your attention on the stomach, relax that whole space. And then either you can consciously bring in a settled peace into that part, or you can imagine or invoke a kind of a clear light. Just bring in a stillness into that space. Intend a harmonization and clarity. All of these, the words are, they always fall short, but when one feels, one brings in that intention, and gently one cajoles the stomach to do what's right. And you find at some point there's a click, and you know that now it's going to handle it, and the digestion passes. It's an interesting idea to think of it this way. We have always relied upon the body to digest mechanically. We've never helped it or participated in its working of something which is so important and so complex. In fact, we often do things which harm the digestive process. After eating food, when all the blood needs to rush there and the body needs to focus on that, we might start a thought process, some intense study, reading, or even some exercise which goes contrary to the need of the body. And once we had an interesting lesson we learned, and it came from a maidservant. She was working in our house, and after eating her food, she would sit down and be almost in a meditative state with her hand on her stomach. And someone asked her, "What are you doing?" And she says, "After eating, I concentrate And she said something like, feel God in my stomach, or feel the digestion and invoke God, something like that. And it struck me as something so important which we neglect. But you can attempt this as an experiment, and you will find it quite a worthwhile experience. And at least the body consciousness will be grateful for the care and support that you provide in it. If nothing else, it's a completion of the whole sacred act of eating. If while eating you have done it with a certain intention and concentration, making it a part of your sadhana, then the post-eating phase, at least the initial part of the digestion also, you can take it into that same movement. And after a point, you will feel that the digestive process has moved to the next phase as it moves into the intestine. You can actually feel that happen. Or even otherwise, having given it a few minutes, your mind can then turn on, but an intention is left and it helps. Now, in all these, you see, from the mind's awareness going through life force into the subtle physical, affecting the gross physical process, of which you are not directly conscious. This last layer of the subtle physical is a powerful means because it is not limited by the limitations of the gross physical. Specifically, the gross physical conscious substance can move only when the muscles move, can sense only when there is a nervous system extending to give you the sensation. But the subtle physical can move even without muscular movement, can sense even without nerves. And therefore, the subtle physical can penetrate into those areas which normally we will have no sensation, such as inside the hard part of the teeth, or inside the bones, and other parts of which we are less conscious. But with subtle physical awareness, you can be as conscious in those parts, of course, on the subtle physical level, as in any other part. But precisely because the biological process is ruled by the subtle physical awareness, it's from there that you can mold and modify. I'll give one more example. I discovered in my own body that with the process that we call aging, the time taken for the body to recover from an illness has been gradually growing, and the recovery from a cut was taking longer. While earlier it would take 1, 2, 3 days, now it takes a week. And these are all the typical signs which we call aging. But in one particular case, when I had a pretty sharp cut, which went in about half a centimeter almost in the finger, in this way, I had a silly thing, I pulled a tag from my luggage, and it's an elastic which just snapped through and cut right into the flesh. Fortunately, it did not go into a more dangerous direction. It was still in the soft tissue. So at that point, it was just something which came spontaneously. I willed that I'm not going to allow any conviction of scar or slow healing in this case. And it was a state which required constant attention of the will or awareness, as you may put it, on that part, holding it and refusing the negative suggestions, which are all part of our normal thinking process, but also holding a conviction in that part of a complete healing with no scar and a rapid healing. It so happened that I had the time at that point, and it was as if I kept the thing pressed, refusing even to look at it, because looking at it would have added to that negative suggestion, and just holding it, but feeling constantly with that subtler feel, and feeling and holding there a harmony and full, complete healthy recovery and healing. So it was kept so, and then in a sense, I continued it through to the point where one falls asleep, so that something of that imprint remains through the night. And from the point of waking up, picking up that thread, Within a day or two, it was as if set, but still I kept it held in attention, at least at the back of the mind, through a whole week. The result of which was at the end of the week, it was completely healed. There was no scar, no line, and I don't even remember now which finger it was or what part of the finger it was. It's as if the whole memory of that illness or of that injury has been erased. And I'm comparing this with something else. It happened when I was in kindergarten, when we used to wear buckles on the side, on the shorts. One buckle had not been put properly, and my arm, as it swung, it caught a point on the buckle and it caused a small cut here. It healed. Must have been what, 4 or 5, but the scar of that has never gone. And I've been wondering what determines the survival of the scar or not. What makes it heal completely, or why does the scar remain? And I found this clue in something which the mother spoke of, which I wanted to share in this context. This is in Mother's Questions and Answers of 1954. I think it is volume 6, page 367. Somebody asks, the question is quite innocuous. Someone asks, why is it that there are people who suffer certain illnesses every year at a particular time of the year, and it repeats at that time of the year only? The time is fixed. What's the reason, and how can one get rid of it? So she says there could be many reasons. She says if you ask an astrologer, he will tell you it's the stars. The stars come to the right position, to the same position. So, and she says, well, this is not wrong. It can be like that. It can also be the individual's reaction to certain types of climate or to the sun's position, or it may be quite simply a bad habit. And she says, if one forms, if by chance it has happened to you twice consecutively, then you have a good formation, you see, which remains like that in the subconscious without showing itself. If you don't observe it, and then just when the time draws near, quite gently it pushes up from within and tells you, take care, the time is coming, the time is coming, the time is coming. So naturally that comes along too. But almost everything that happens in the physical is like that. The first time it may be quite simply a concurrence of circumstances. Then the mind intervenes and makes a construction. Now, if one accepts the construction, one is sure that it functions with clockwork precision. And even if one says, oh, nonsense, it's only an idea, and does this, still the idea, instead of going away, enters inside into the subconscious. Simply the subconscious mind, and there it remains quietly. And then when the time comes to manifest itself from inside like this, it makes a kind of, as though it were tickling the memory a little bit, nothing more than that, just that. If it rubs the memory just a little like that, then suddenly one day you remember, why last year at this time I was ill, and crash, there it is, it has entered. It has entered the zone of the active consciousness, and a few days later, the thing happens. But when you have had either an experience or like this, some kind of phenomenon or an illness, above all in the case of illness or even an accident, the body remembers for a very long time. Now this is the key. The body remembers for a very long time. If you want to be completely cured, you must cure this memory in the body. This is absolutely indispensable. And whether you know it or not, you work in order to cure the memory in the body. When the remembrance is effaced, the body is truly healed. This is the key. If you want to be completely cured, you must cure this memory in the body. When the remembrance is effaced, the body is truly healed. Then she continues, unfortunately, instead of drawing the remembrance, you push it back. Most of the time you push it down into the subconscious and sometimes into the inconscient, still more deep. Well, now if it is pushed back, it is not completely effaced, then very gently, without seeming to do so at all, it comes up to the surface. And something of which you have been cured for years, if by chance it crosses your mind simply like that, just like a little dart, as fast as that, like a passing dart. Why at this time I had that? You may be sure that sooner or later, a few seconds, a few minutes, a few hours, or days later, it will return. You can, it may come back in a much milder form, it may come back in the same form, it may come back even more strongly. That depends on your inner state. If you are in a pessimistic state, it will come back more strongly. If you are in an optimistic state, it will be much weaker. But it will come back. And you'll have to begin the battle all over again against the memory of your body so as to destroy it. And this is the key. The battle is against the memory of the body. If this time you are more attentive, if you can destroy it, you are cured. But if you don't destroy it, it will return. It will take a longer or shorter time. It will be more or less total, but it will return. It can come back in a flash if you're wide awake, and when it returns, if you have enough knowledge and indeed enough clear-sightedness to tell yourself, well, here is that wretched remembrance come back again to play its tricks. Then you can strike a violent blow and indeed destroy its reality. If you know how to do this, then it is an opportunity to get rid of the thing immediately. But it is not very easy to do this. Now I pause here and I put it in the context of what I discussed earlier about that little scar on the elbow. When I look at it rationally, it happened at a time when the body was most youthful, young in the conventional sense, when the renewal of tissue and the healing was most rapid, and it was such a superficial scar, and yet it remained. And I've asked myself why, when other scars in other parts of the body have been healed, and much larger cuts. And now if in this context I look back, I will see that when it happened as a child, it left an imprint, the memory of which is still here to me now, live. Whereas other parts of the body where I've had so many cuts while playing so many games or accidental things, I don't even remember them, and those scars don't exist on the body. This one I remember as an incident vividly, and it also happens that the scar is there, and the two things are of course connected because the remembrance is there. Not just in mind, it's a remembrance in the body, which is the problem. Now, how does one turn one's attention into that and get rid of that remembrance? This is really the challenge. And this is what Sri Aurobindo is describing here. If the mind can take up and control the instincts and automatisms of the life energy and the subtle physical consciousness and the body, if it can enter into them, consciously use and fully mentalize their instinctive or spontaneous action, their action becomes more conscious, more aware of itself, and more perfect. This is the key for all processes of the physical consciousness. We are right now looking at just this scarring, falling ill, etc. in this example of the memory of the body. So how do we deal with it? And you'll see Mother answers that question. Someone asks how to do it. She says it's not easy to do it. Someone asks how to do it. How to do it? Mother laughs. How to do it? It is the same thing as, the same method as knowing how to destroy a formation. You understand? Now here she is referring to something just in passing, and then she describes also various ways to do it. But you see, the key here is the same thing which you do in the mental consciousness. You have a mental formation and you have to let go of it. An obsessive thought, an obsessive idea, an obsessive image, a suggestion prompting you. What do? Well, you deal with it in the mental consciousness. Yes, a fear also. But in the case of a fear, it may also hit you at the level of life energies or the physical. But ultimately, it's a formation. A formation in mind, a formation in life force, a formation in subtle physical or gross physical. It's still a formation, and the method of dealing with it is the same. The difference is this: the mental formation is more directly accessible to the mind. The formation in the life force or the physical is not so directly accessible. At least we are not conscious unless we turn the mind to it. But if we turn our mind to it and can become conscious of it, then the means of dealing with it is exactly the same across all these levels. So, what that means? And she tells you this. It is the same thing as, the same method as knowing how to destroy a formation. You understand? It is a certain strength to dissolve things which can undo formations. Now, she is going from a very general description to specific methods. When people read this or follow this, most people try to fall straight to the specific methods. And sometimes some methods don't work so easily for one or other, and we get stuck there. The thing is to see the general principle she is referring to. It's a certain strength to dissolve things which can undo formation. If you get this idea, there's a strength you can put, a power, a concentrated awareness to poof, dissolve, undo. That's the key. It depends on the nature of the formation. If it is like this, a formation of an adverse kind, then you need the force of a perfectly pure constructive light. If you have this at your disposal, all that you have to do is to bombard the thing with it and you can dissolve it. But it is an operation which must be performed with inner forces. It cannot be done physically. That is why all physical remedies, you see, are simply palliatives. They are not cures because they are not strong enough to touch the living center of the thing. And then after a brief silence, she says, the same phenomenon occurs with moral difficulties. If one could succeed in destroying their remembrance, destroying in oneself the memory of the state one is in when in that difficulty, if one is sincere, it would be the end of all difficulties forever. It's a very interesting thing. I'll read this part again, because it is a different domain of action at the level of the moral, and of course it's also related to the life energy instincts there. The same phenomenon occurs with moral difficulties. If one could succeed in destroying their remembrance, destroying in oneself the memory of the state one is in when in that difficulty. The memory of the state one is in when in that difficulty. That memory has to be destroyed. And then to that she adds, if one is sincere, it would be the end of all difficulties forever. And this, if one is sincere, is important here, because sometimes we get into that awareness, we have the capacity to destroy, perhaps even the power to destroy, but something in us does not want to let go that. One is, for example, and something which each one has to introspect, there's a certain obstinate difficulty you struggle with. And just imagine, put yourself in this position where you stand before the mother and Sri Aurobindo and say, here, take it all away from me completely so that it never again comes back and I'm free of it. And if you're fully vigilant in yourself, you will find something which is, but I can't lose it. I will miss this. And there's a part which even remembers what it will miss and clings in the remembrance to the thing. It takes various forms. It's a very tricky thing. If at that point you could actually let go of all that, it would be taken away from you and you would be free of it. The problem is we are not able to let go because there are parts in us which refuse to let go, while the rest of me, which is this very nice goody-goody person, wants to be free of it. There is the rest of me which is not yet integrated in my central individuality or my higher parts. And that's where the problem starts. That's why she adds, if one is sincere, it would be the end of all difficulties forever. But the key is still this: destroying in oneself the memory of the state one is in when in that difficulty. And think of it, when the tendency returns, it returns as an awakening of the state in which it is active. Or your thinking and dwelling on the state is what pulls it back. And as long as some part of your consciousness holds the vibration of that state, it is still in you. The problem is still in you. And it's only when that vibration of the state is expunged and nothing in you holds it, that's what we mean by the memory is gone, then you're free of it. This truth of the formation having its own force, its own vibration, creating or holding its own state, is a very powerful principle, and we'll just make a few observations on it. So the question is, do the memories disappear if you stop thinking of them? Generally, when we stop thinking of them, the memory is pushed back or pushed down and goes into the subconscious, as she describes. From there, it pops up. It provokes your thinking, even if you tried to stop thinking about it. And when it returns with force, then you realize, oh, I have not thought about this for months, and yet now it's coming with so much force, I can't stop thinking about it. You're a victim of the impulsion which is pushing on you. So that's not enough, just stopping to think about it. You have to deal with it in terms of dissolving the formation. I want to make a few observations about this formation. First, in terms of a negative formation, if there can be such a strong force and persistence, we can also turn the principle around and make a positive formation, isn't it? If there is a positive formation, a positive conviction, a positive memory of a state of health, of harmony, of strength, of optimism, that will have the same effect. And we would want that to go as deep as possible into the subconscious and in the inconscient as a positive state, isn't it? One can do that also. And I'll bring forward here a certain difficulty which certain personalities have. And I'm going to put it in a general way, but you will see it applies to all of us, and especially to certain types, but it applies to all of us in the principle. There are people who tend always to find something negative to criticize, to be pessimistic about, or some negation of a kind. They may be full of energy, they may be bright, positive sounding, but a turn of the mind which always looks to the negative. It goes in strange ways. I'll just give one small example in which one sees how the mind works. A person wants to buy, and there's a whole range of products, and he's trying to find out which one he wants to choose of these various options. And the tendency of the consciousness is to begin to cross out what you don't want. You may say it's a logical way of elimination. But you see how the mind works. The focus of the consciousness is on the not wanting, the negation, the criticism. This is not good enough, this is bad. The focus is on that. Whereas if the focus of the mind was on the positive thing, it would start by isolating the 5 things which I would most want, and then reduce to that one which I want, the one thing. But there's a certain turn of nature, and it can be quite deep-rooted. It does not always appear obviously as pessimism. It's a turn to giving more importance to the negative thing. This tends to short-circuit the state of efflorescence of energy, if I may use that word, the full blooming out of your positive life energies and vitality. Now, I have observed this and kind of experimented with this a little bit, and the conclusion which I came to was it's a habit of the state of mind, or sometimes more difficult, the state of the energies, to be in this way. And if one uses now this principle of what we are discussing and enters the awareness of the habit and changes the state, one can actually put ourselves instantly, overturn the state and be in this positive, blooming energy. When you do that consciously, you may at first even feel parts in you which oppose and resist. They are attached to, they enjoy that state of slightly dark, pessimistic, or negative attitude. They enjoy it because it makes them feel somehow self important. It's a perversion still. But if you're able to make that turn, you can switch states instantly. Now, in practice, when dealing with others, how it can work is this, and you observe this so often in oneself or in others. A person is in a down state. Somebody comes who is not aware of this condition but comes with some positive news or some positive message. Instantly we flip. I am in this down depression, and suddenly this person comes full of energy and says, "Oh, come on, let's go. This movie has come, or this object. Here's a gift for you. The one thing which I had been missing for years, and it's there." And poof, the whole state flips. What flipped it? You can say the other person's energy was contagious, perhaps. But you have also been in a situation when you were depressed and the other person came with a lot of vitality and you pushed it away to wallow further in your self-pity, refusing his optimism. But now you accepted it. What was the difference? And if you introspect, you get to that very fine line of choice to be in this state or not be in this state and to flip. And often when you're not aware, it's easy to flip. When you're aware and wallowing, it's harder to flip. And I found it easy to flip it in another person where it was necessary by distracting them. So they are in this state and you find something to pull their mind completely away from that. And once they're away, you as if reinforce the positive imprint and then ask them, "What do you feel now?" And poof, it's gone. And this is the kind of interaction which a good doctor might do, or a therapist might do, or just a friend might do, consciously or unconsciously. But the key was distracting the attention, getting the person to turn away, and then shifting something at the energetic level, and then it's gone. But if we consciously do this, and consciously imprint a positive state, consciously reinforce a positive state and memory, and imprint it, then we benefit also. And it can neutralize, overcome a negative state. And dissolve even to some extent. Mm-hmm. Yes, of course. One can turn to the divine and it is always positive. But when one is depressed, one says, "Oh, divine," and one makes it a negative experience even. Yes.
Strength of faith.
Yes. When we use this word faith, then we are tapping at the very core of this whole discussion. In the yogic sense of the word, faith is that part within you which knows truly. It knows in identity. It's not a mental belief, which is different from faith. So the true faith is already a part in you that knows. And to bring that out flips things, changes things automatically. So this, I go back to the earlier example of the finger where I had the cut. And the struggle for me was to hold the faith of full cure. If I allowed my mind to follow its natural rhythm of habit, it will say, "Well, here I am at this age when it takes a week to repair and always scars, and this is a deep cut, it's not going to heal easily. If nothing else, a layer of skin will peel off," and etc., etc. You can remember all those things because it happens and you've experienced it and the memory of it is so vivid. So I had to actually hold consciously, and it involved a state of concentration to keep that space out of that and hold the faith or the conviction of its full cure. Then only it could remain. But it was a bit of a struggle. Sri Aurobindo uses this word in the Synthesis of Yoga, which we have discussed earlier. The Shraddha, which is the faith, the holding to the truth of things, and the Ashraddha, the contrary movement, which is convinced of the opposite, or which rejects the truth of things. And one has to, as if, imprint the true faith in all parts of our being, then the state of consciousness, convinced, holding the truth of what it truly is the natural state, is the natural health, gives you the realization and leads you to the result directly. So that's really a key. And it's really that which we are discussing, but through a different entry point, so to say. Hmm. Yes. So, right. Yes. Yes.
Case, for instance,
Yeah.
the father was rhesus positive, the mother was rhesus negative.
Mhm.
So the doctor said, not more than one child. And if you're going to have this child, it may need a blood transfusion.
Mhm.
And the mother said, what is that?
Mhm.
3 children in 3.5 years? No problem.
Right.
So,
Mhm.
this question of
Yes. In such cases, very often the person gets through because of a tremendous optimism in the life force. This is how most people who manage to get through in this way manage. It's a faith in the life energy, even if the mind doubts, and that goes a long way. But here, what we are doing in the process of the yoga is not relying on the habitual tendency, even if it is a faith in the habit of your nature, but consciously invoking or developing a new mold, a new faith, or a new conviction. And here I want to complete this discussion. I said we can bring a positive state and a positive memory in the body also, but equally the principle can be taken a little further. One can imprint a faith into another, a formation into another person, or conversely, receive unconsciously or consciously a formation into oneself. And these things, unfortunately, go very deep and they can go quite far. If you spend time in the company of pessimists, if you spend time in the energies of those who live by values which are contrary, who have the opposite faith, who have completely different values contrary to your aspiration, even if you think you are safe, their thought imprints, their life force imprints intrude into your consciousness because they are friends and there is an exchange of energy unconsciously. And those formations get in, settle in your subconscious and pop up from inside. And it can be extremely harmful in the long run. Because in the short term, you think you're immune because you're conscious they are there and you reject the suggestions. But a year later, when they are not there, you're alone, you don't have that tight conscious protection, that's when those formations still sitting in you pop up. And they can stay for years if you have not dealt with them. And sometimes, and sad to say, sometimes people have been infected for life. Even their spiritual potential has been shortchanged because of some powerful negative intrusion of this type. And one has to be extremely careful. Yes. Mhm. The point being that one has to be conscious, one has to be careful. If we are conscious, you can sometimes feel that formation entering. And what I've found is sometimes these formations can penetrate even when in a telephonic conversation or even by email. It's an actual experience all of us would have if we expose ourselves to something like this. I've seen, I was on a chat in a public forum, and as I was expressing something in a very naive and innocent way, somebody put a very dark negative force and said something which was quite crude and rude. But the moment that thing came, or even before the text appeared, it was as if I could feel the energy entering. It got in and got into the physical consciousness and got stuck somewhere. And it was a bit of a struggle to remove it. And if I put it in the context of this energy, of this memory of the body, I'll say the memory is still not gone. It's still there somewhere in the physical consciousness. Even the part of the body where it hit, I can still feel as if the imprint of that memory. And this was just on a chat session in a public forum. you can understand why in the spiritual traditions they valued isolation so much, and why those who have taken to deeper or higher and intense concentration in their spiritual efforts prefer to remain isolated than enter in any kind of free interchange. Of course, in this yoga, that kind of isolation is not permitted because we want to transform our external nature and our life itself. And yet, a partial separation, let's say, not isolation, a partial separation where we keep out those things which are harmful and contrary, is a necessary part of the three parts of the concentration of the effort we have to make: aspiration, rejection, surrender. Just as we reject from our own nature things which are contrary to our aspiration, it is important to remove from our life organization, at least the conscious space which is in your control, to remove those things which are contrary to your aspiration. And even to the extent of refusing interactions which involve that kind of a negative energy. Sometimes, though, you are under assault, there is an attack. The thing will not let you go, and you don't have a choice. In which case, of course, you have to struggle with it. And the lesson in that, in the larger scheme of things, is that the possibility of the attack represents a vulnerability in your own consciousness. And at least we should take it in the spirit that the attack comes to help you to develop the immunity. Because eventually, in the complete perfection of our being and the complete transformation, we become immune, or we must grow towards that immunity where whatever comes, even the most negative, can be taken up and transformed, freed from its perversion and released back into cosmic nature as a positive force now. It is this kind of a complete transformation of the energy which is the characteristic of the supramental consciousness. When the supramental consciousness meets even a most negative and hostile attack, because it is an inclusive power and it is an embracing, uniting power, it sees everything in terms of complementarities. So it can see the truth of that and it can dissolve the false form and reveal the truth of it, and the thing goes back transformed. Or it can absorb the truth of it and simply complete itself, and the attack is just vanished. It is this truth which is presented to us in one of the famous Puranic stories. I think it is the sage Vashishta who, Vatapi story? Agastya, yes. There is the story of Vatapi there and his twin brother. There are two demons, twins, and it is their normal pastime to harm the sages. And how do they do it? They have a certain power. The brother of Vatapi cuts him up and cooks food out of him and goes to these sages and says, "Here, I offer you a gift. You are a guest in my house. I give you this." I think the sage comes, or they just invite him and then give him this gift. His own brother is cooked. And once the sage has eaten and the food has gone in his stomach, this brother has a secret mantra and a power. He invokes. He says, "Vatapi, come out now." And Vatapi reassembles himself in the stomach, tears the stomach and comes out, and the sage is killed. Now you think about it. This is a very profound symbolic story. It is teaching a deep truth. And it is really the truth of all that we have been discussing. A small thing goes in and it can come out in a most destructive form because it exists in the universal nature. A part of it gets in and universal nature calls it out from within you. If you have suppressed it, then it is not solved. You have to face the problem eventually. But one day, Agastya, knowing that this is the game they play, he deliberately goes to their house. And they welcome him and say, "Oh, we are going to give you the most delicious food." And again, Vatapi is cut up and cooked and given. And Sage Agastya eats up the meat. And after he's eaten, the brother invokes the mantra and says, "Vatapi, come out." Nothing happens. Again he says, Vatapi, come out. Nothing happens. Instead, the sage gives a long, deep burp of satisfaction and says, sorry, and he says quietly, Vatapi has got digested.
Actually, Vatapi is the form of goat.
I see. Oh, I see. Okay. Oh, I see. Okay. Oh, I see. Okay. The story is more complex. Vatapi takes the form of a goat and then he is cut up and cooked. So it is goat meat. But the idea then even is more complete. You see, the goat represents a certain animal energy and it relates to those instincts in us which are characteristic of that energy. But the point being here, the true spiritual power, complete in itself, can deal with it, digest it, transform it, whatever it needs to do, it can deal with it the right way. Of course, as we are, we don't have that capacity except with certain smaller things, but this is the capacity and the truth towards which we must learn to grow. Quickly to recapitulate from what we read from the mother, the method is knowing how to destroy a formation. It is a certain strength to dissolve things which can undo formations. Depending on the formation, you may put a pure constructive light on it, bombard it with that light and dissolve it. But it must be done by an inner force. And the same phenomenon exists with moral difficulties. If you could succeed in destroying the remembrance, the memory of the state in which one is when in that difficulty, then it can be dissolved. And this is the memory of the body, memory in the body at levels of which we are not conscious in the mind. So when the mind turns in this way to the life energies, it might find many formations in the life energies, which as it becomes conscious, it can deliberately undo. Or it can imprint positive formations in the life force. And then it can enter into the subtle physical awareness. And there again, it can undo formations or imprint positive formations or hold a certain imprint of a positive formation to heal, cure, create a new habit, change whatever rhythms. In principle, there is no limit. As from there we enter into the gross physical consciousness itself, one can change things from within permanently. Permanently. In correspondence with Nagin Doshi, he had a weak constitution. He would always tend to fall ill. He had regular stomach upsets. In all the correspondence, Sri Aurobindo keeps writing to him, you must get rid of this habit of the body, habit of the stomach. Now, the habit may be localized or it may be generic, as in case of moral things also. There can be a localized hook or center, although it's a state. But the imprint, or shall we say the seed of the state, may be in a specific location in the subtle body also. So these are things which one develops as one becomes aware. One develops the capacity to identify, and also by willing it to dissolve from within the formation. Sometimes the formation is elastic and there's a dissolution and then kind of reassembles after a while, though much weaker. It doesn't have the same hard shell, and again you dissolve it from within and so on. Eventually it loses that. But still something of it may remain as a memory. And that's why the eventual removal of the memory itself is the final freedom. So I wanted to give a picture also of the other complexities involved. Not only we can put a positive formation, but we might receive a negative or positive formation from the environment, from our social interchanges, from an environment which is not part of our conscious social interchange. As, for example, being in a public space and just being in that general space where those negative energies exist. You go to a space where people have a pessimistic outlook, and you will tend to get infected by it and so on, though you may have no personal relation with them. Visiting hospitals, for example, would be one area where there is a certain disturbance in the energy, because most people come there with illnesses, and there is this whole focus on certain illnesses, and it's very easy to catch the conviction, I will say the wrong faith, the negative faith of the beliefs that the doctors and patients normally live by, and so on. Even if you're centered within, a part of you is centered within, the rest of you is still maybe open, and things can get in at an unconscious level. So the vulnerability exists. Of course, one can do something more. If you're not just centered, you can consciously create as if a protective shell of awareness. Then you can protect yourself to a great extent. Even then, things can get in at a subconscious level, but if you're vigilant and hold this aura of protection, then to a great extent, even that can be minimized or prevented. The method for that would be, before you go into that space, you become aware. First of all, you center yourself, and from your center, you become aware of all that you are in your mental, vital, emotional, subtle physical and physical awareness. Often that takes the form of a kind of a cocoon-like shell of awareness. This may include also all that we include in what Sri Aurobindo calls the circumconscient, but at least in the space of your awareness that you're carrying with you as you move. And that whole space being aware, you then put a will in that entire awareness that you will not allow any negative suggestion or negative vibration to enter. You can include in this a conscious prayer and an invocation for spiritual help from the divine. You may use an image of the Divine Mother surrounding you in a protective envelope, or her light surrounding you. These are all methods which lead to the specific result of basically holding this awareness in an upward turn of aspiration, awareness, and protection. Refusal of anything negative. With that state remaining centered and holding this, yes, one can go in and pretty much be practically immune to it. Still, the vulnerability can exist if someone deliberately wants to poke a negative energy. Then your protective shell may not be strong enough. But otherwise, the casual things floating around, you may be free of or immune to those. That's why I call it a practical immunity. Yeah. You ask for the divine help to hold this protection. Now, the actual experience may have many variations. You may actually feel her light and peace and force surrounding and protecting you. Or you may simply relate your own existing awareness to her in a turn of aspiration. Or you may simply put your mental will with your center only in relation to the divine, but not the rest. The rest kind of receiving the glow of reflection, so to say, from that. So there are many variations. In practice, not everyone gets it in the highest or best way, but whatever way you can. That's why the key elements are remaining centered, holding full awareness of your being as much as possible on all the layers, and the intent to refuse negative things and negative vibrations or suggestions. But once you have that, one can pretty much handle it. But the thing is, in practice in life, one does not stay in that kind of state all the time. You may do it for a special cause, an event, but otherwise, especially when one is with friends, then the vulnerabilities are much higher. Yes. Mm-hmm. Skin and teeth. Okay. Do you remember when she's okay? Okay. The question is that Mother comments that it's not difficult to change. It's not difficult to change diseases for skin and teeth, right? Why? Possibly because the skin is the part in us of which we are most conscious, and so it's easy to turn one's awareness to that. It's also one of the parts of the body which is in constant state of renewal. We are shedding constantly the cells from the skin, and they say up to 80% of the dust in your room will be the skin which has been shed from your own body. So that just shows, though, the amount of material that's being constantly renewed, which, because it is so active, an imprint of will on that leads to a more rapid response and change. Teeth are the one part of your bone structure which is most conscious and closest also to the brain, richly filled with the imprint of the nerves and pulp and things like that. So also more painful when you get punctured there. But therefore that represents a certain plasticity. And interestingly, that's also a part which is in a constant dynamic change. At night when you sleep, the teeth above and below, pushed down by the jaw pressing, they actually change their position over a few days and rearrange themselves to fit, to lock perfectly and remove the gaps between them. This is the reality of the teeth. That's why if you press your teeth, massage your gums regularly, then they actually rearrange themselves more harmoniously over time. Of course, you must do it with that intent, will that intent into the gums. But that whole part of the gums and teeth is almost in a fluid state of constant adjustment over days. And if for some reason the responsive teeth below has been removed, the teeth from above grows as if to fill in the gap until it may even drop out, because it's trying to fill in a gap which unfortunately it can't fill. That's why it's important to keep the artificial teeth to match, to support the other tooth. Now this is all part of a very dynamic, fluid process also. I suppose that's the reason why these things are easier to change. Yes. Yeah, interesting. That's an interesting experience. When you do a headstand, you feel a rush of energy in the jaws and teeth, and as if something thickening there. Yes. Also, I noticed sometimes when you're in half sleep, just at the point of falling asleep or waking up, and you become acutely conscious of the subtle physical, you often feel the teeth vividly, and the energy and density of energy around the teeth are felt vividly. There's some kind of condensation of energy there. I just leave with one more example, which was part of an experience which I had several times. I found when I was staying in a particular house of some friends that I would tend to catch a cold easily. And it would start with an itch in the throat and then spread and then become a full-fledged cold with spreading in the nose, etc., etc. But the starting point was an itch which I learned to recognize. And I don't know I won't speculate on what caused it, but since it used to happen there, I was especially careful. And I found on many occasions, as I was falling asleep, or more often I would wake up in the middle of the night in half sleep state, and I would feel the itch in the throat starting. And it would be felt intensely, almost like a heat. But that was also the time I said, generally I would say, oh, now it's got, finished, it's gone. Next few days I'm stuck. But on some occasions I found that instead of accepting it, if I held back, refused it, and put a will just to overcome, I found there was a kind of a huge heating up and a battle as if, and sometimes there would be a tilt and next morning it would be gone, rather than becoming a full-blown cold. But the thing, and then I realized later, was what I was catching had not yet got into the physical body. It was still in the subtle physical, and that's why it had a peculiar sensation of heat and intensity. And at that state, when you're half conscious, half asleep, you're much more in the subtle body, one can catch it on the subtle body. And sometimes it happened, I woke up from the sleep completely, and I found I don't have the itch. I go back into the sleep when you're more in the subtle body, and I could feel the itch again. And that's how I isolated that it was in the subtle body. And from there, it could be driven out. Once it got into the gross physical, then it had to go through its machinery of process. And there was no way to prevent that. So, this is the key which Sri Aurobindo refers to in one of his letters. If you can get rid of it before it gets into the gross physical, you have a chance there. Once it gets into gross physical, then there is the automatism. And because it is at a domain which is subconscious or unconscious, you don't have access to it anymore. And you go through whatever phlegm and other processes involved. But at the other levels, and this is why we reread this, if the mind can take up and control the instincts and automatisms of the life energy and the subtle physical consciousness and the body, if it can enter into them, consciously use, and as we may say, fully mentalize their instinctive or spontaneous action, the perfection of these energies, their action too becomes more conscious and more aware of itself and more perfect. Now, in our discussion so far, we applied this to illnesses and such formations. But here, what he's speaking of is actually developing and awakening the conscious of all the automatisms of these layers, including the normal functionings involved in normal health and normal life. And at that level, you can change them and perfect them. If you look at emotional responses which we have, they are also a part of an automatism of our life energies. Something happens, you react with certain emotions. It's an automatic process. The energy coming in provokes that reaction. This energy emerging provokes those responses in the long run. If I get angry, my nerves are shaken, my mind is clouded, and so on. But notice what happens when you try to change your emotional reactions. You bring your mental awareness. You restrain the instinct. I feel like I'm about to get angry, and I become conscious of that tendency and pull it back. And then I hold it back. And as it tries to slip out of my control, I'm forced to put my awareness in the part that's slipping and restrain it. Unconsciously, unknowingly, I am mentalizing an automatic response. And to the extent that I have mentalized it, I have control over it with my mind and will. And to that extent now, I am free of the habitual reaction. And I can redirect it. I can give a different response. I can withhold this response, change the habitual response of anger until the anger reaction goes away completely. And then I may, of course, respond with force as needed, but without the anger. And if I can do this in the culturing of the emotions, the same principle applies at the level of the subtle physical and gross physical. You observe a movement, you put a mental awareness in being aware of it, and then you pull back or modify with your will as the movement moves. The things which slip out are the parts where you're not conscious, and as they slip out, you put your mental concentration and try to become conscious of them more and more. And in so doing, one can describe it like this: one extends the envelope of awareness into these parts. And a similar process could also be used to extend the envelope of your mental awareness of your own thoughts. And inward, outward, and all the instinctive automatisms of your thought processes. The tendency of your mental energies and concentrations to disperse, to flit, to jump around, to remain superficial and shallow, or to immerse themselves in something which is pleasant and convenient, to ignore, to push aside what is important. All of these are habitual imprints in the mind space. You can turn your attention, become conscious, and change them. And as easily as you change your mind's habits, you can in principle change your life energy and emotional habits, and in principle enter the subtle physical in such a way, and the gross physical, and change the physical habits similarly. Now, it is for a good reason that nature makes this hard. Remember, if you by mistake swallow wrongly and the food goes in the wrong pipe, nature kicks in her automatism of coughing to throw out what is harmful. If somehow you could make that whole swallowing process and all those parts conscious and override this instinct, and at that point, if the food went into the wrong pipe, and if you didn't consciously remove it, then it would harm the body. So, all those things which involve the survival and protective mechanisms of our physical consciousness, nature has withheld and makes it very hard to penetrate. But it is possible to enter in a modified relationship where you enter in, let's use the word friendship rather than conquest. To assist, participate in as a friend rather than trying to control and make myself this super capable guy. So if you change that attitude, then the body also yields, the physical consciousness may yield differently. And I give the example of the breathing. The breathing is a critical life process, and yet nature allows us this control to stop and modify as we want. Of course, once we cross a certain threshold, if I hold the breath too long, then she pushes her will through the instinctive process and forces me to breathe, or she knocks out the mind, makes me unconscious so that this interference on the body's survival process is removed, and then she can kick in and do the normal breathing herself. So once you recognize that there is a responsibility as one enters this awareness and relates in the right way, then she will yield also. And we can use this as a hint on how to relate to the body consciousness when one begins to work upon it. It is almost like a child which is dumb. It is very innocent, very simple and trusting. But it also holds like a child. If you give it a knock, it remembers it for a very long time. So it holds in its memory for a long time if you abuse it. And so if we address it with that kind of a compassion and love and caring, then it can also open up and become more trusting, and things can be much simpler in this way. In principle, this envelope of awareness can go deeper and deeper. It can take up organic processes of the stomach, kidneys, liver, the thyroid and the various other lymph organs, etc., and actually modify their imbalance. Now you will see most of the illnesses associated with some organ or other are illnesses in which that organ is overproducing or underproducing what it must do. If you enter in this kind of an turn of attention and bring a harmonizing influence, often one can set right those tendencies. I'll just give one example of a person who had gallbladder, some problem with the gallbladder, the stones in the gallbladder. And this was a relatively young girl. She must have been 28, 29 or something. And they had detected the stones in the gallbladder. It was extremely painful. It had gone on for months. And her husband took her to the hospital. They were about to operate the next day when he called and informed this. And I said, please don't make that mistake. You're going to ruin her life. Because after that, she'll have to be on special diet and so on and various other things. So he said, but what can I do? I've already committed. So I said, well, just tell the doctors you'll come back in a week. You have some urgent family work, and postpone the operation by a week. So he did that, fortunately. And then they came. And I showed her a series of exercises, basically, involving bringing attention to that part of the body of which she is unconscious, causing movement in those parts. It's all soft tissue. Causing movements in those parts, and then to address the part which is the lowest unconscious automatisms, to take certain juices which would flush the whole system and which have a purifying effect on the body. Now the specific juices are not critical. These things help to purify, that's good enough. And certain other exercises which would help to hold attention and things like that. It was a very simple regimen. Within a few hours of doing it, she had relief from the pain. Within a few days, the pain had stopped. And by the time the appointment came for the next week's surgery, they could tell the doctor, sorry, we don't need the surgery, the pain is gone. She was free of the pain for more than a year. And then once again, I told them, you please continue this for as long as you can. Once again, they complained, oh, now the stones have formed. I said, are you still doing those exercises? She said, no, we stopped them long ago. But the key was not the exercise. The key was bringing awareness in that part. The exercise is only meant to do that. The stretches, bending, etc., etc. When a person does a comprehensive set of asanas from the Hatha Yogic system, but not just a selection, but a comprehensive set. In fact, the Hatha Yogic system is the most comprehensive body awareness training. It ends up touching every part physically of the body. If done in the right way, it can be a means for developing the totality of the physical consciousness in this way. And I'm leaving this only as an indication of how important, how powerful this mentalizing of the body consciousness is, and how effective it can be in principle for any illness. Where we cannot mentalize, where we are not able to reach our influence and will, we can use the indirect methods of tapping the body's unconscious automatism through medicine. That's all that the medicine does. It provokes a trigger reaction in the automatism of the body's functioning on that unconscious level, nothing else. In principle, if you could tap that automatism, you could do the same thing by mental will, and you would be free of the need for medicine. But since we can't, we use help there. Where there is a Shraddha, the negative faith, in that layer, we use medicine. But where we can extend the influence of our positive faiths, we can even get free of the medicine. I won't recommend stopping all medication instantly, especially when you have a chronic tendency. The chronic illness is nothing but a habit which has sunk into that unconscious layer. So until you can tap it and dissolve that knot of the memory in the body, you should not stop the medicine. Once you dissolve it, you will know, you will feel the freedom from the illness. And then, of course, the medicine is irrelevant. So this is the importance of this mentalization of all these layers of consciousness. And then think about it. If mind can do so much with a mental will in these parts, imagine what more a gradation of consciousness above mind can do. And the intuitive consciousness penetrating and still higher gradations penetrating can awaken in them spontaneously the right knowledge and the right harmony and the right action of things which we, as I said, will find difficult to imagine. We can, in principle, reprogram, so to say, the whole functioning of our physical system. And if that envelope is now pushed all the way to the cells and then into the cells, you can change the habit of the cells to age and die. And it is this which Mother did in her own body all the way into the cellular consciousness. That's the layer which is, so to say, the last boundary in the physical consciousness. Not accessible to us as we are, but certainly at an organic level, we can imprint a will easily, which may seep in eventually into the cells if it is done with persistence, and if a spiritual light fills that mental awareness, then it can have those effects. But currently we are not conscious, and it's difficult to reach that domain or that layer as we are today. But in principle and eventually, we should be able to do that. I think we will pause this text for today. Yes.
Because this food poisons and something like the illness is there
Mm-hmm.
to reject it. I always had problems with people. The other things with here your finger is moving up to the physical.
Yes. See, just loving that part is not enough. because the part may still have the habit and memory of the negative thing. The love will only make it feel good. It say, oh, I am cared for, but anyway, I am destined to get a scar. I am destined to go through my. It doesn't change that. So something more is required. On the other hand, the first question what you asked was? Yes, you said you found it difficult to reject. When you find it difficult to reject a negative suggestion, instead of rejecting, you can bring a positive suggestion and a positive conviction or faith into that part. That expels the negative automatically. So rather than fighting the negative, work on the positive Shraddha, the positive faith. Yes. The knowledge is this very one sentence which we have today worked upon. Making it conscious. No, I'll put it to you this way. How can you make it conscious to yourself? What are the different methods you could use? And just do it. Eventually, it boils down to just that. Now, the question is if you have some awareness of, say, asanas, exercises, you could, of course, tap that. Even otherwise, a lot of people find healing taking place because of massage. A lot of illnesses are cured because so-and-so used a particular oil and did a massage in a particular way. You know what the secret of massage is? Pressing the tissue makes it more conscious. And if the person doing or the person receiving puts a positive intent, then you're putting a positive formation in the part of the tissue that's conscious momentarily while under pressure. And that formation stays. And if the doctor does it with the intent to heal, he's putting a very strong vital formation, and a life energy formation has very rapid effects. I'll give the example of an interesting experience I had with a doctor in Pondicherry. He's an acupressure therapist. He had come briefly, there was some interaction, and he was full of vitality. The characteristic I noticed was this huge vitality. And a very, even in vitality you have gradations. So he had this very physical vitality, very dense, almost on a vibration of a physical level. And there's huge optimism and this bombastic faith. I can do anything, I can cure anything, I can heal anything, I know all the knowledge. And then he grabbed me suddenly and pressed this. And you want to get cured of this? Here, press this point. And when it went, and of course it pained like crazy when he pressed hard. And it was not the physical pain. When he released it, I realized there was a burst of energy he had put and just spread all over me in this glow of vitality, feel good, and all that energy, which normally comes when someone heals you with pranic energy. But the focus and the mental will, all of which were so strong in him, it was enough to be able to cause a physical cure momentarily at least. Now, in people in whom it is not deep-rooted, it would have caused a permanent cure. If the illness was deep-rooted, they would have got relief, which would last a few weeks, and then the things would tend to come back. He will again give a punch, and again you get relief, and then things tend to come back, depending again on how deep it is. And in cases where a person has a pessimistic temperament, you will find diminishing returns. Each time you do this exercise, this time it lasted less. The first time I was free of it for 2 weeks. Second time it's 10 days. Third time it's 1 week. Fourth time it's 3 days. Now the effect is less and less. Because it's as if something within you is refusing that help and pushing back. This is the reason why, and now I'm looking at it on a larger level, fads are so successful. You know what is a fad? Just as there is what do they call it? In style, you have a fashion, a wave of fashion. Everybody wants to dress the same way, and this is in style. So in healing, you have fads and fashions. So sometimes it was eat this, drink that particular juice, eat only grapes, eat only wheatgrass, eat only. Everybody pulls out some material, and there are companies which are basically profiting in this way. But they work. People feel good when they start that, except after a while, the feel good becomes less and less, and people stop eventually. During the time when the thing is in fashion and a fad, there is this whole, on a universal level, there's a whole enthusiasm around that, into which you're tapping, which gives you a kind of a lift. Once that fades, the whole movement fizzles out. So there are things like that happening also on a collective level, but this is really at the heart of it. You don't need any specialized knowledge. The thing is to become aware of these layers, and he has listed all the layers. Use methods to assist you in developing awareness in these layers, and then having this will on it. This is the method of the direct psychological action. Where you don't have that, you use techniques, and techniques are nothing but means of giving you action through the automatism on those levels. So do this exercise, breathe in this way, eat that particular thing. They're all tapping different gradations of the automatism. Yeah. Yes. Now, when you make an affirmation, it's really giving form to your will and helping to create that formation, at least on the mental level. You can do the same thing without an affirmation. You would get the same result. But for most people, especially when you deal with people who are not trained in the mind, the affirmation is a useful way to, as if, seal the formation which you make. I'll put it in this way. The majority of humanity have an untrained will, an untrained imagination, and a very poorly trained mind generally. In such circumstances, the repetition of an affirmation many times helps to strengthen the formation. But if you have trained yourself and your mental awareness, mental will, visualization, just the awareness, all of these are sufficiently developed, just one punch is enough to produce the same result as a weak mind affirming 100 times. And this is really prayers also. You see, you can have a wordless prayer, a state of relation with the divine. And that's more directly effective. But when you can't have that, then you use a mental formulation, worded, with heart, with mind, etc., to help you enter in the relation. But that's really what prayer is doing. Just to develop mind, prayer may not be so effective. Because prayer still can be done in a state where the mind's concentration is not so clear. It can be done with mind in a weak way. We are just repeating the words or maybe feeling something in the heart. To develop mind, that's not enough. Even the aspiration is not enough to develop mind. To develop mind, you must actually exercise mind. So just as the body, you can have an aspiration for your body to become strong. Yes, it will have an effect. But when you actually exercise the body with the aspiration, then you have the complete effect. So you must exercise the mind. Someone asked the mother, I just happened to see this while coming, someone asked, how do you develop the will? And mother says, by exercising it. You have to exercise the will. So it's just that. I don't know, I don't think I can get it back here, but it's something so simple. Oh, here. This is concentration. How to increase concentration, single-mindedness, and will force? They are so necessary for doing anything. That's the question. Mother's answer? Through regular, persevering, obstinate, unflagging exercise. I mean exercise of concentration and will. That's it. Regular, persevering, obstinate, unflagging exercise. What kind of exercise? Again, there's a whole range of possibilities. You can take books which teach you different types of exercises, or you can simply exercise it in everything you do, and then you're doing it constantly. But it's useful to take up a hard thing. You can go to the Matre Mandir, surely. But you can do something which is hard. Take up degrees of difficulty which make it harder. And so you push that capacity to that extent. Willpower and concentration. If you have these two, Mother says, you can achieve anything. Anything without exception. So these two, if we can exercise, it's worth it. Okay, I think we'll pause here. And later he speaks of still higher powers entering and infusing. Once this boundary has been extended by the mind, to some extent, or the higher powers entering can assist and tremendously speed up this boundary of awareness down into the most material part of the physical. We'll continue next Friday.